There's a strange quietness in the modern world, a kind of emotional fog that leaves an unbelievable number of people walking alone through life, even when they swear they want to find love. It's not loneliness in the dramatic, heartbreaking sense, but a subtle, creeping disconnect that keeps people drifting instead of bonding. Walk into any cafe or scroll through any timeline, and you'll see it. People longing for closeness while staying miles away from it. The Stoics, though living 2,000 years ago, were eerily familiar with this human contradiction. They understood how a person could be surrounded by opportunities for connection and still remain untouched by any of them, lost in their own storms, blind spots, or self-crafted walls. To the Stoics, relationships were not just emotional experiences, but mirrors reflecting our character, our attachments, our illusions, and sometimes the fears we refuse to name. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and nothing captures modern singleness more accurately." Many people today stand at the edge of love, but never take the step, not because something external holds them back, but because the battles inside are louder than the world outside. Stoic philosophy teaches that the heart is often shaped not by what happens to us, but by how we interpret our experiences, the narratives we cling to, and the armor we build from old wounds. And in that sense, Stoicism becomes less about suppressing emotion and more about understanding why the emotion exists in the first place. And this leads us to the real question, the one beneath all the noise, distractions, and modern comforts. What is truly happening inside people that keeps them single, even when they believe they're ready for love? Before we talk about solutions or insights, we first need to explore the deeper forces shaping this modern phenomenon. Before you go, if this introduction stirred something in you, if it made you think, question, or even whisper a quiet, "Yeah, that's me," then don't just slip away silently. Subscribe so you don't miss the deeper truths we're about to uncover. Like the video so this message reaches someone who might desperately need it. And leave a comment, your story, your thoughts, or even just one sentence, because sometimes a single voice can spark an entire conversation that helps others feel less alone. Tip 1. High personal standards. There's a quiet, invisible force that keeps many people single. Not heartbreak, not bad luck, not even fear. It's the weight of high personal standards. At first glance, it sounds noble, almost heroic. We imagine someone standing on a cliff at sunset, arms crossed, refusing to settle for anything less than a perfect match. It feels cinematic until the years start passing and the silence of that cliff begins to feel colder. In psychology, this mindset is called idealization, and it often leads to long stretches of solitude, not because good partners don't exist, but because no one ever survives the comparisons we build in our heads. The Stoics understood this trap deeply. They believed that perfection is a fantasy, and that humans by nature are flawed. Epictetus once warned, "When you are devoted to perfection, you will be disappointed by reality." Many people unknowingly chase this disappointment. They build a partner in their imagination with impossible traits: emotionally mature, financially stable, passionate, kind, mysterious, funny, and somehow broken just enough to be interesting, yet healed enough to cause no trouble. It's a paradox only fiction can deliver. Real people don't stand a chance. There's an old folk story of a villager who searched for the perfect camel to buy, strong but gentle, fast but calm, young but experienced. He inspected hundreds of camels and rejected every single one. In the end, he returned home empty-handed, only to find that the perfect camel he envisioned never existed outside his mind. This is the reality for many singles today. High standards are beautiful when they protect your dignity, but dangerous when they imprison your life. The Stoics would say that wisdom lies not in lowering your standards, but in seeing people clearly, without the distortions of fantasy or fear. That's why many people unknowingly remain single, not because love isn't available, but because they're chasing a version of love that doesn't exist in the real world. When personal standards turn into rigid expectations, they slowly transform from a source of strength into a silent barrier, one that keeps genuine connection out and leaves a person alone with ideals that never come to life. Tip 2. Independence is key. There's a moment in life when independence shifts from being a strength into becoming a fortress. It happens quietly often, without the person realizing it. At first, independence feels powerful, like the hero of a movie who walks alone under a neon skyline, confidently navigating life without needing anyone. But as years pass, that same independence can harden into a shell. Many people remain single, not because love hasn't found them, but because they've built a life so self-sufficient that there's no open door for anyone else to enter. The Stoics admired self-reliance, but they never glorified isolation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." In other words, independence is noble, but humans are not built to exist as self-contained units. Still, modern life teaches people to equate independence with identity. The more someone builds their routines, their financial stability, their emotional resilience, the more they fear that letting someone in might disturb the equilibrium they fought so hard to create. They begin to see relationships not as companionship, but as potential threats to their hard-won peace. There's an old folktale about a blacksmith who forged the strongest armor in the village. It protected him from every blade, every arrow, every danger. But the armor was so heavy that he could barely move, and eventually he couldn't walk toward the people he cared about. His protection became his prison. This is the psychological reality for many fiercely independent singles. The very strength that once saved them now keeps them emotionally immobile. Independence becomes a habit, then a belief, and finally an identity, one that makes partnership feel unnecessary, even burdensome. The truth is, independence is a beautiful fire, warm, bright, empowering. But like any flame left unattended, it can grow into something consuming. Many stay single because they don't want to lose themselves, not realizing that healthy relationships don't erase independence, they expand it. The Stoics would say, the goal is balance, to walk strong, but not alone, capable on your own, yet open enough to let companionship deepen your life. Tip 3. A skeptical view of emotional relationships. There's a particular kind of person who watches emotional relationships the way a seasoned traveler watches storm clouds carefully, defensively, always calculating the risk. They're not cold, and they're not incapable of love. They've simply seen enough emotional chaos around them to develop a deep skepticism toward romantic involvement. For them, getting close to someone feels less like stepping into romance and more like stepping onto a battlefield where the rules keep changing. This quiet suspicion becomes a lens through which they view every potential connection, often pushing them toward a life of comfortable solitude. The Stoics understood this instinct well. They believed that attachments, when misunderstood, create illusions about happiness. Epictetus wrote, "When we are puffed up with pride, forgetful of who we are, we cling to things outside ourselves." Many modern singles interpret this as a warning. Emotional entanglements can cloud judgment, distort priorities, even threaten one's inner stability. So they approach relationships like a philosopher examining a puzzle cautiously, analytically, rarely letting themselves trust the initial warmth of attraction. The result? They remain single, not because love is unavailable, but because they're unconvinced it's worth the emotional price. Consider a simple village tale. A farmer was offered a magnificent horse for free, but he refused it not because he disliked horses, but because he'd once been thrown violently from one. People mocked him for his fear, but he would simply say, "A gift that can break your bones is no gift at all." In the same way, many people carry emotional bruises that make even healthy relationships feel dangerous. Their skepticism becomes a shield, and over time, that shield becomes so familiar that they forget what it feels like to stand without it. Yet skepticism, when left unchecked, quietly reshapes a person's life. It keeps them cautious, guarded, always evaluating motives and risks, never letting the heart wander freely. The irony is that this defensive stance isn't born from indifference. It's born from depth, thoughtfulness, and a desire for emotional safety. The Stoics would remind them that wisdom includes discernment, not withdrawal, clarity, not fear. And although skepticism protects, it can also imprison, leaving a person safe, steady, and alone in a life where nothing hurts but nothing deeply connects either. Tip 4. Career commitments. There's a certain kind of person whose life feels like a long corridor of deadlines, ambitions, and relentless forward motion. Their career becomes the axis around which everything else spins. It's not that they reject. Love simply becomes something for later, a chapter postponed until the dust settles. But the dust never really settles. Promotions replace promotions, goals replace goals, and the years glide by quietly, almost deceptively. In this fast-paced rhythm, relationships are seen not as opportunities, but as potential interruptions to the grand mission they believe they must complete. The Stoics would not be surprised by this mindset. They spoke endlessly about duty, the kind a person chooses with full conviction. Seneca wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere," meaning that a person split between too many pursuits eventually loses themselves. Modern singles who drown in their careers often do so because their work gives them identity, direction, and a sense of mastery over life much more predictably than romantic relationships ever could. For them, love feels like a gamble, but work feels like certainty, and certainty becomes addictive. There's an old story about a craftsman who built the strongest bridges in the kingdom. When people asked why he never married, he'd smile sadly and say, "A bridge must always hold. A heart does not." His hands stayed busy, his reputation grew, and yet he walked home every night to a quiet house with no lights but his own. His life was full, but only in the way a workshop is full: tools, dust, noise, but no warmth. This tale is repeated today in countless forms. The executive who sleeps in hotel rooms more than their own bed. The artist who pours emotion into canvases but not into people. The doctor who heals everyone except their own loneliness. Career commitments offer clarity, status, and structure, but they can also quietly replace connection, sometimes without the person noticing until much later. The Stoics would admire dedication, but they'd also warn against building a life that has no room for genuine companionship. Work can define a legacy, yes, but without someone to share the journey. The victories become quieter, the celebrations shorter, and the evenings longer than anyone expects. Tip 5. The importance of financial independence. There's a growing group of people who walk through life with one core belief: if I don't build my own stability, no one will hand it to me. They've watched relationships collapse under financial pressure, seen couples argue over money more than anything else, and learned early that independence is not a luxury, it's survival. So, financial freedom becomes their fortress. They focus on earning, saving, investing, and securing their future with almost military discipline. And while this mindset brings power, security, and confidence, it also makes them cautious about letting anyone into the world they've fought so hard to build alone. The Stoics valued self-sufficiency in a similar way, not the kind built on wealth alone, but the kind that comes from discipline, foresight, and responsibility. Musonius Rufus taught that a wise person must learn to provide for the necessities of life without burdening others. Modern singles who prioritize financial independence embody this insight with almost philosophical purity. For them, partnerships can feel risky, another budget to consider, another person's choices to absorb, another uncertainty creeping into the stability they've spent years crafting. And in a world where many fear becoming financially trapped or dependent, staying single can feel like the safest route. A simple folk story illustrates this perfectly. A woman climbing a mountain alone carried only what she could hold. People asked why she didn't bring a companion to help share the load. She answered, "Because, when the path narrows, I must trust my own footing, not another's." She reached the peak, strong and unbroken, but when she looked around, no one stood beside her to share the view. It's a bittersweet truth echoed today. Financial independence buys freedom, but sometimes at the cost of connection. Of course, this commitment to stability shapes more than bank accounts. It shapes emotional boundaries, too. People who value independence often choose solitude, not out of fear of love, but out of respect for the life they're building. The Stoics would admire that discipline, yet remind us that wisdom also includes knowing when strength becomes isolation. Financial independence is empowering, but when it becomes a shield so strong that no relationship can pass through it, it quietly turns into another wall, keeping the heart at a distance, one that's harder to notice and even harder to dismantle. Tip 6. Learning from past experiences. Life leaves traces, and for many, those traces are emotional scars. Failed relationships, betrayals, heartbreaks, they all become invisible markers on the soul, guiding future decisions in subtle but powerful ways. Many singles today carry these marks carefully, not out of bitterness, but out of caution. Each disappointment is a lesson, each misstep a warning sign, and over time, the weight of these experiences can create an invisible barrier to intimacy. People stay single not because they don't want love, but because their past has taught them to measure every step, every glance, and every word with vigilance. The Stoics believed that experience was a teacher unmatched by theory or desire. Seneca wrote, "Every man's life lies within the present. It is the future we are afraid of, the past we cannot forget." Learning from past relationships is an act of Stoic wisdom, reflecting, evaluating, and internalizing lessons so the same mistakes aren't repeated. But while reflection is essential, it can tip into overcaution. Some individuals end up so attuned to past failures that they hesitate to take any emotional risk at all, choosing the certainty of solitude over the unpredictable terrain of intimacy. There's a story about a potter who once created a vase so beautiful that everyone admired it. But a single crack appeared during the firing, and though he repaired it meticulously, he feared every new vase might crack in the same way. He continued crafting, but never with the carefree joy he had before. Similarly, many singles approach love cautiously, their hearts repaired but wary, carrying both the beauty and fragility of their past. Their caution is understandable, even wise, but it can also turn into a habit that keeps them from fully engaging with the present. Ultimately, learning from past experiences is both a shield and a guide. It teaches resilience, self-awareness, and clarity about what truly matters. Yet, when reflection becomes hesitation, wisdom transforms into limitation. Many people remain single because they honor their past too faithfully, allowing it to dictate the possibilities of their present. The Stoics would suggest that the key is balance, holding lessons close, but never so tightly that they block the heart from opening again. Tip 7. The pleasure of solitude. Solitude is often painted as lonely or undesirable, but for many, it is a sanctuary. The quiet hours alone become a canvas for reflection, creativity, and self-discovery. People who relish solitude find comfort in their own company, exploring passions, thoughts, and dreams without compromise or distraction. For them, being single is not a gap in life. It's a space filled with freedom, focus, and clarity. The world outside can be loud and chaotic, but in their solitude, they discover a rare form of contentment that others might spend a lifetime chasing. The Stoics embraced solitude as a tool for inner growth. Musonius Rufus advised that a person must learn to be alone in order to understand themselves and cultivate virtue. Solitude, from a Stoic perspective, is not emptiness. It is presence and opportunity to engage deeply with one's mind and character. People who stay single often adopt this philosophy intuitively. Their independence and contentment with themselves reduce the urgency to seek fulfillment from others. They find joy in their routines, their hobbies, and the simple act of being fully alive in their own skin. There's an old folk tale about a hermit who lived atop a mountain. Villagers assumed he was lonely and unhappy, but when they asked him why he had chosen such isolation, he replied, "Here, the wind tells me truths I could never hear in the crowd." The hermit's solitude was not emptiness, it was clarity, perspective, and peace. Similarly, many singles choose to cultivate life on their own terms, savoring moments that might be diluted or disrupted by constant companionship. Solitude becomes a deliberate choice rather than a circumstance imposed by the world. Yet the pleasure of solitude carries a subtle paradox. It is empowering, but it can also become self-reinforcing. The more content someone becomes alone, the more hesitant they may feel about inviting someone else into their life. The Stoics would admire this inner strength, but they would also caution against allowing solitude to transform into isolation. When embraced mindfully, solitude sharpens the mind, nurtures the soul, and enriches life, allowing a person to enter future relationships not out of need, but from a place of profound awareness and choice. For those who've stayed with me until the very end, thank you for taking this journey into the deeper truths of single life. Being single is not simply a matter of circumstance. It is shaped by choices, experiences, and the wisdom we cultivate along the way. Whether it's valuing independence, learning from the past, or finding joy in solitude, each insight from the Stoics reminds us that living intentionally is far more powerful than living by default. Embrace your path, reflect on your patterns, and let these lessons guide you not to fear connection, but to seek it wisely, fully, and on your own terms.